just wanna love you, just wanna.
This is an audio-visual story of a heart-wrenching tale that spans continents and time, set in the 18th century. Get ready to embark on a journey of love, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond of true love. Episode 5: The Devil Sets His Trap. Edward arrived at London docks and proceeded to oversee the unloading of some trade goods he had brought from Italy. After signing a few papers for the ship manifest, Edward had his luggage put on a wagon to go to the train station, ready for his journey to Oakfield Manor to see his beloved Isabella, when he was approached by a man. "Good morning, Edward. I have been sent to greet you on behalf of Captain William. My name is Davis, better known around here as the Professor. The captain has urgent business to attend to. He asked me to take you to his hotel to meet with an old friend of yours and Charlie's." "Has this anything to do with Arthur Lowings, my father?" asked Edward. The Professor then handed Edward a letter from the captain, which he began to read, then said, in an angry voice, "He may be my father, but I am not his son. Let's go, Professor. I need to find out what the hell is going on." Isabella was returning to Oakfield with Henry and Lord Kemp when she met the captain and John on the way. "Captain, John, what brings you here at this time of day?" John replied, "You, Miss Isabella, we wanted to escort you back to Oakfield and make sure everything is well with you." Before Isabella could reply, "Gentlemen, there has been a situation in Norfolk. Let us discuss this messy business back at Oakfield, that is, if Miss Isabella agrees," said Lord Kemp in an agitated voice. "Please, Lord Kemp, you have no need to ask, especially regarding what is happening in Norfolk." "Thank you," he replied. Edward arrived at the hotel with the Professor. As they entered the room, they were greeted by George, Sir Arthur's doorman. "Master Edward, I am so pleased to see you again. I just wish it was under different circumstances." "George, it is good to see you again. But what is this all about? What has been going on?" replied Edward. The three men sat down and began to talk. "Is Isabella and Lady Margaret all right?" asked Edward. "Isabella is fine," replied the Professor. "Thank the stars Isabella is all right." Edward thought for a moment and said, "Wait, you only said Isabella is fine. What of Lady Margaret?" The Professor began to explain about the riding accident, but not why it happened or who was behind it, for obvious reasons. The time was not now to let Edward know that his father was behind not only the death of Lady Margaret, but also the death of Sir Arthur's wife, Edward's mother, all those years ago. Edward listened very carefully to every word being said by the Professor. He then turned to George and asked, "How are you involved with all of this, George?" George began to explain to Edward about what his mother had done all those years ago and how she did not trust Sir Arthur, which is why she had the air vent placed in the study and office in the house, and why he has been helping Carl and the captain for years with information of Sir Arthur's business. Edward thought for a moment, then said, "It sounds all cloak and dagger, and could be a story from that new Sherlock Holmes novel by Arthur Conan Doyle. It may sound like a novel, Edward, but everything we have told you is real and has and is happening, which is why Lady Margaret's brother's land needs to be saved from your father and those supporting him," said the Professor. "Tell me what happened to the land, and why so soon after Lady Margaret's death?" asked Edward. The Professor began to explain what the government and the Bank of England had done when there was a knock at the door. George opened the door and was heard saying, "Please come in, we have been expecting you." Isabella, Lord Kemp, Master John and the captain arrived at Oakfield and proceeded to go into the study. "What can we do about the land in Norfolk?" asked Isabella. "Nothing for now," replied Lord Kemp, who then asked Isabella to show the captain and John the letter. After reading the letter, both John and the captain looked at each other when the captain asked, "May Lord Kemp and myself be excused for a moment, Miss Isabella?" "Yes, of course." The two men then went into the garden. "What information have you, William?" asked Lord Kemp. "It is better if you read this letter I have first," replied the captain. Lord Kemp began to read. As he was reading, it was obvious he was ready to explode with anger. He looked up from the letter and said to the captain, "I swear, I will bring down that animal Lowings and all who are with him. William, I think it is time we start to break down Lowings' little empire. We will start from within his own kingdom, and what better way to start with those who stand to lose the most, the bank." Meanwhile, back at the hotel, The guest was invited into the room by George. Edward turned and was shocked to see his friend Otto, the German diplomat from Colombia, standing there. Edward got up from his chair to greet his old friend and asked, "Otto, what brings you here at a time like this?" "I was sent here by our friend in the Colombian government after your father tried to stop the coffee trade to Britain, and he even tried to stop the trade to America, but he failed. The president knew something was wrong and sent me here to find out what it is." "So what did you find out, Otto?" asked the professor. "Edward, your father has managed to block any money from Colombia to you, including the gold mine. He used political power, lobbying MPs in the British government that trade with Colombia goes against the treaty Britain has with Spain, who has colonies in the Americas. As of 2 days ago, you are now a wanted man, under the law of causing political unrest." Edward just sat back in his chair and thought for a moment, then said, "George, you need to go back to the house and carry on as normal. Talking of normal, what did Arthur say when he found out Charlie had left with his wife and children?" "Only did I notice when Master Charlie left, to which I replied, 'No, sir, I was home with my bad back for 2 days.' That seemed to do the trick. He never asked again," replied George. Otto stepped forward and said, "Edward, you need to go somewhere safe and lay low until this mess can be sorted out." "I am not leaving without my wife Isabella," snapped Edward. Otto said that he would make sure Isabella was safe under German diplomatic protection. This seemed to have made Edward feel better. The professor looked at Otto and asked if he would travel to Oak Field now to make sure Isabella was safe. "Edward, we need a ship and fast. I will have one ready for tonight and be at the docks near the Three Moons at 10 p.m. The 4 men were about to leave when Edward asked Otto to give the captain a small leather case that had important documents. "Tell the captain he can use the documents to his advantage. He will know what to do." Sir Arthur was travelling back to London from Norfolk, feeling very pleased with himself. Everything was going his way, and now he had control of the land in Norfolk. His next step was even bolder, and with the bank behind him, he felt good. He not only has the land in Norfolk, but has stopped the flow of Edward's money from Colombia, thinking Edward will come crawling back to the family home. With Sir Arthur's next move, he felt certain he would soon become Lord Lowings, or Lord Arthur. He liked the sound of either of them. As Sir Arthur left the train, he was met by Pete Turnbull, the landowner from Norfolk, who is a man who would do anything for money. "Is it done?" asked Sir Arthur. "Yes, it was easy. He was so far gone taking opium that I only needed to supply him an extra pure batch of it." "What about the body?" asked Sir Arthur. "It was taken to the hospital for dissection to train surgeons and doctors." "Good. Now that little problem is out of the way, the rest will be easy. Did you collect the papers from the bank?" asked Sir Arthur. "Yes." "Good. Now we need to go our separate ways and meet at the club before going to Surrey tomorrow." Isabella woke up early, made herself presentable, and went to the breakfast room. She was surprised to see Lord Kemp, Master John, the captain, already sitting waiting for her. Isabella noticed someone new at the table and was about to ask when the captain said, "Miss Isabella, this is Otto, a friend of Edward's and also the German diplomat in Colombia." "Welcome to Oakfield, Otto. Edward has spoken of you many times, and of your father Carl. I believe your father was related to Edward's mother." "Thank you for your hospitality, Miss Isabella. Yes, my father and Edward's mother were cousins," replied Otto. Before Isabella could reply, Lord Kemp said, "Miss Isabella, Otto came with news from Edward, and it is not good news. Edward's father has found some way to have the government and the Bank of England deny Edward access to his money from Colombia and the coffee trade. From what we know, it's not safe for you to be here at Oakfield either." They sat in the breakfast room for most of the morning, talking about what Sir Arthur had been doing. It was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon when the sound of carriages and horses was heard arriving outside the main entrance of the house. John looked out of the window and saw a few men he recognized who were clearly from the bank and 2 members of Parliament, who John knew were all part of Sir Arthur's corrupt club. John turned to the others and said, "It has started. They are going to use the same move they used for the land in Norfolk." Lord Kemp was so furious, the captain and John had to restrain him from doing anything rash. Otto told Lord Kemp, John and the captain to stay in the room. "Allow me to find out what and why these men are here, Miss Isabella. Please, may I have a word with you?" Otto then began to talk to Isabella quietly. There was a knock on the door. The butler was about to make his way to see who it was when Isabella told him to go to the kitchen for now. Otto opened the door, and there were two men standing there, smugly smiling at each other. One of them was holding some official-looking documents. By order of the Bank of England Parliament and by the law of the land, this house, Oakfield Manor, and all lands as of 2 days ago belong to the bank. You are hereby given 1 day to leave said house and land. Failure to do so will result in anyone still in the house to be forcibly removed, said one very large man, who must have been the one in charge of the whole thing. He then proceeded to hand a document to Otto, who accepted the document and said to the men, "Gentlemen, before you settle down for the day, I must ask you to leave." The two men began to laugh. "I don't think you fully understand the situation, sir. You are on the Bank of England's property without permission, and we have been generous in allowing you 1 day to leave said property," replied the large man. "On the contrary, sir, I believe it is you who does not fully understand. I am here at the request of the palace and your government. I am the German ambassador newly appointed by Queen Victoria herself, and as such wherever I stay is known as German soil, and as such is not governed by your law. I am afraid you have come on a wasted journey, gentlemen, so if you don't mind, please leave unless you wish to have an international incident on your hands." Otto proceeded to show them the official diplomatic ring. The two men turned and waved to the others, a sign to leave. Both Otto and Isabella returned to the breakfast room, where the three men stood up and applauded Otto for his quick thinking in using his authority over the bank and Parliament. While Lord Kemp began to read the document the men from the bank had given Otto, the captain said that it was a smart move to use the ring. Isabella noticed the ring, which reminded her of something but could not remember what it was. Even in the darkest of times, love will be the light to guide you out of the darkness.
Till we grow old, please tell me you'll stay or take me away. I want you for myself every single day.
Edward was writing a few letters, while the professor was at the docks looking for a ship that was leaving England. "George, take this letter with you and pass it on to Carl." "Very good, Master Edward. I will pass it on as soon as possible." "Thank you, George, for everything. I had no idea all this was going on for all these years, especially as my mother knew what he was like." "Your mother was a great lady, sir, and there was a time she was in love with your father until he became a member of Parliament, and he could use the power of the government to get rich and powerful. That's how he was able to obtain your mother's assets in Germany soon after she died. There was something your mother said a long time ago when she stopped trusting your father. Your mother said to both myself and Carl that she had something that would bring Sir Arthur down, but we never knew or found out what it was, as she died 2 days later. One thing your mother was very strict about was for you and your brother never to find out about your father until you could look after yourself in the world. She didn't want anything to happen to you if you knew before you had the strength to stand up to him. I understand why Mother wanted to protect us, but now his true colors are showing. What an evil, selfish excuse for a man he is. He will find whatever he is up to is not going to be easy, not while I am alive." The professor was making his way back to the hotel when he noticed some men who were not dock workers, nor from the ships. After asking around, he found out they had been hired by the bank to work with the Metropolitan Police, to stop Edward's ship bound for Colombia from leaving, and to hold Edward in a cell until he is transported to a private debtor's prison. The professor arrived at the hotel, entered the room, and told Edward about what the bank had done hiring those men, and why. Edward sat back in his chair and said, "So my father wants to lock me away so he can control my money. Otto was right all along. He told me in Colombia that not all things in England are not the same as before I left. He added Sir Arthur is looking for more than being a sir. It is only now I understand what his meaning was. I have to find a way to stop him from destroying anyone else's life. You can only do that once we leave England and have a plan," replied the professor. "We? I can't have you involved in this. You have your life here." "I was involved as soon as I found out who was working for your father and why," replied the professor sharply. After a few minutes, Edward passed the professor a letter and asked if he could take it to an address in Bond Street, wait for a reply, and bring back a small carry case. As the professor was leaving the room, he turned and told Edward to be ready to leave at 11 p.m. It had been 2 days since the bank sent men to Oakfield Manor. Lord Kemp had left early in the morning to attend to some business and use his military contacts to find any information as to what Sir Arthur was planning next. John, Otto and Isabella were in the study talking about the situation of the house and lands. "Is there nothing that can be done to save the house and land from that man and the bank?" asked Isabella. "Not while the bank has the right and the blessing from the government," replied John. "We will have to leave here as soon as possible, Miss Isabella. You need to travel to a safe place," said Otto. "I will go to my Edward, and we can find a place to live a life together. I don't care where, as long as we can be together," replied Isabella. Just then the captain walked into the room, holding a telegram. "We need to get Miss Isabella away from here tonight. That low-life snake Sir Arthur is here, and we'll have an official document claiming the house and land belong to the government. The house is to be used as a residence for King Alfonso, 12th of Spain, while he is in England. He will arrive in a few weeks." Isabella turned her head away to not show her tears to the others. John said, "We have prepared for this, and we packed only what is needed. We are ready." "I want to go to my Edward," said Isabella, fighting back the tears. The captain took a letter out of his pocket and handed it to Isabella. "This letter was handed to me from a messenger from London, along with one for myself. It's from Edward." Isabella sat reading the letter for what seemed to be an hour before she said, "Captain, could you find a ship for us within a day? Edward has arranged for a ship for yourself and John. Edward and the professor had no choice but to leave last night, but you will both be reunited soon." "Who is the professor?" asked Isabella. John and the captain seemed to speak at the same time and said, "He's a good man. He will protect Edward." Isabella then asked why is it not safe for her to stay here and just leave when the men arrived again. The captain and John looked at each other. Both knew why it would not be safe, but thought it was best not to tell Isabella. Otto turned to John and said in a low voice, "You mean that devil of a man would put Miss Isabella in a house of exotic women for the pleasure of those fat politicians and bankers, as she has no guardian since Lady Margaret died. But she is married to Edward now, and that must count for something. No, my friend, to mention they are married now would be suicide. It will give Lowings the means to destroy the marriage by saying Isabella used voodoo to charm Edward into marrying her, and then he could have her flogged and placed in a prison or sent somewhere where no one will find her," replied John. Isabella was gathering a few things in her room for the trip when John entered the room with Otto to see if they could help. "John, could you collect Lady Margaret's box of jewellery from her room? Also, you will see a leather document case. I will need that as well." "As you wish. And would you like me to get Lady Margaret's journals, the ones she started when her brother died?" "Yes, please. I had forgotten about those. I think there are 7 altogether on the bookshelf near her desk." It was late when they left Oakfield Manor. Isabella refused to look back at the house that was her home. She said to herself, "It will be my home again one day." Once they arrived at the docks, there were a few of the professor's men waiting for them to make sure they got on the ship safe and sound. Otto was saying his goodbyes to John and Isabella when Isabella noticed the ring again. She clapped her hands and said, "I remember now. Lady Margaret gave me her brother's ring and some documents. I put them in the secret place inside the window ledge, the one you made for me, John, all those years ago. I checked there before we left, and I have both the ring and the documents, plus a few things from when you were a very young girl," replied John. Isabella was so happy to remember that she had something special belonging to Lady Margaret, her brother's ring. It is now late October, and it has been 3 months since Isabella and John left Oakfield Manor. Sir Arthur has been using Oakfield as his main residential home for the last 9 weeks. Everyone except Mary the cook has been dismissed from working in the house, and Sir Arthur has his people working there. Mary was allowed to stay because of the fact her cooking was well known in the district as the best. Sir Arthur made sure everyone knew he had the best food served when he had one of his many dinner parties. Sir Arthur was in the study talking to a few gentlemen from the bank and Parliament about the King of Spain's visit in November. With the King of Spain here, we could use that to our advantage with trade, and the small matter of having all the trade of sugarcane, coffee and tobacco from Puerto Rico, said Sir Arthur in a smug way. Yes, and maybe with the King's help we could persuade the President of Colombia to give us, Parliament, the 30% of the gold mine of your son Edward, shouted a very loud, large man, spilling his brandy as he laughed. I have no son in Edward. I will not attach myself to an enemy of the crown or our great government," smiled Sir Arthur. Groans were echoing around the room. All right, our great government and then the crown." This made everyone in the room laugh out loud. At that moment, the butler arrived to tell Sir Arthur there was a gentleman to see him in the library. "Excuse me, gentlemen, I have a matter to attend to. Please feel free to help yourself to more drinks." Sir Arthur then proceeded to walk to the library, where Pete Turnbull was waiting for him. "Well, what did you find out?" asked Sir Arthur. "I know where they are, and it's not out of the reach of us using the law over there as the island is in British hands," replied Turnbull. "What blasted island are you talking about?" said Sir Arthur, frustrated and in an angry tone. "Jamaica, sir. They are living in Jamaica at Morant Bay." Good, they are within our reach, and the only piece missing to complete my plan." "Can you find trusted men to send and deal with it all?" asked Sir Arthur. "They have already left England, sir, and will be there soon, and deal with the problem," replied Turnbull. On hearing that, Sir Arthur said, "It's late. Go to the kitchen and tell Mary I sent you down to have something to eat and drink. When you are finished, you can sleep in the stable hand's room." With that, Sir Arthur turned and went back to the study to join his elite club of power. Edward and Isabella had set up a modest home near the sea in Jamaica, and John and the Professor had built their huts near Edward and Isabella. There was no talk of England or Sir Arthur. They were waiting for news from the captain and Carl. John and the Professor rebuilt or repaired the small fishing boats the locals use, for free in exchange for fish, fruit or vegetables. Isabella teaches the children from the small community, and Edward helps local farmers get the best prices for the crops they sell to the trading companies on the island. The local people call Isabella, Edward, John, and Professor Talawa, which is a Jamaican patois word that means to be strong, fearless, strong-willed, and not to be underestimated. It was one morning Edward was repairing a wall when he noticed a small box that had fallen between the gap between the old rotten inner wall and the new wall. He pulled the box out and realized it belonged to Isabella. He called her into the room and said, "Look what I have found," looking pleased with himself like a schoolboy handing the teacher an apple. "My box. I thought I had lost it." Isabella sat down and opened it. There were a few things from her childhood and the documents Lady Margaret had given her, and then she saw the ring and quickly placed it on her finger. It looked too large for Isabella's small hands, but she didn't care. Isabella was proud to wear it. Isabella opened the document with her name on it and began to read. After a few minutes, Edward noticed Isabella's eyes, and he could see she was getting emotional. "What is wrong, my love? Why the tears?" asked Edward. For a moment Isabella could not speak. Then lifting her head, she said, "Lady Margaret changed my position in the house." "What do you mean, my love? Changed what?" Isabella handed Edward the document, stood up and just looked out of the window. Edward began to read, and after what seemed to be ages, he got up and went to the door and called John and the Professor into the house. Edward told them to sit down. Isabella had some unexpected news. "I have a document signed by Lady Margaret and Henry James, the Attorney General." Edward began to read. The first part reads as follows. "Now Isabella is married. Lady Margaret will no longer be Isabella's guardian, but will change the status of Isabella legally by the law of England, with Henry James as a witness on this day, 11th of August 1884, to be my legal daughter, and as such will inherit Oakfield Manor and all lands belonging to said manor, and any property and land of my late brother Lord Henry Oakfield, upon my death." Both John and the Professor punched the air together and said, "Yes, we have the devil by the horns." Edward said, "We must return to England and claim what is rightfully Isabella's." "Yes," said John, "but not you, Edward. You are still a wanted man. I will return with Miss Isabella and meet up with the captain and Carl to work out the best way to deal with this. John is right. We need to find a way to get your name cleared and also return what is rightfully yours, your money and trade rights." Isabella was sad, thinking she would be without her Edward again, and said, "I have loved being here and the life we have, just being happy and free. But I also want justice for what that man has done to not only Edward, but for all those people who were in his way to have more power and wealth." Everyone sat there for a while, partly in shock that they had been given such a powerful document that could change everything. The Professor asked to look at the document, and Edward handed it over. He then proceeded to inspect it. Suddenly the Professor said, Did you see the few lines in Latin on the reverse side of the document? Edward and Isabella shook their heads. Miss Isabella, was there an old-looking sealed letter with the documents? Isabella looked surprised he knew about the letter and said, "Yes, there is. How did you know?" "It is written here. The letter must only be opened after you have read this document." Isabella asked Edward to open the letter, who then broke the seal and began to read. After a few minutes, Edward asked Isabella to sit with him. "What is it, husband? Why do you look so pale all of a sudden?" John and the professor had noticed that Edward was visibly shaken by what he had just read. "It is a letter for you. It was written when you were 3 years old. The letter reads, 'My beautiful, funny and smart Isabella, I know you are too young to understand now, but when you are older, I hope you will understand why I had to go and leave you with your mother and Lady Margaret. I was called away to a place called South Africa. This will be the last time I will leave you, so next time I return to you both, we will live a happy life as a family with my wife and my beautiful daughter. I love you both very much. Never forget you both have given me a heart filled with love.' Signed, Henry Oakfield, February 4th, 1866. Edward then said, "There is more to the letter after the message to Isabella, but it has more to do with the house and lands of Lord Oakfield." Just then the professor said, "The date in the letter was February 1866. The Major died a few months later." Isabella turned and said, "Lady Margaret told me a long time ago that my mother died of a broken heart after my father died. Now I understand the love they had for each other, because I feel the same way about my husband. My mother died a few weeks after hearing my father was dead. I remember as if it was yesterday. It was 4 days before my 4th birthday. We buried my mother. Then Lady Margaret took me to England to live in Oakfield Manor." Edward looked at the other documents and asked Isabella if had she looked at them to see who they were for. Isabella said, "Not really." Edward showed John the name on one of the documents. John looked up with a surprised look and with a shocked voice said, "Why did Lady Margaret write to the Prince Regent, Prince Albert?" "Do you mean Queen Victoria's son?" asked Isabella. "Yes," replied John. Edward was unaware that a ship bound for Jamaica was approaching and was set to dock in 2 days. On board are individuals dispatched by Pete Turnbull to carry out the unsavoury tasks assigned by Sir Arthur, a man who orchestrated the demise of his own wife and Lady Margaret. His sinister intentions extend to his son, with a callous pursuit of power and wealth.
I just wanna love you, just wanna hold you, just wanna be with you till we grow old.